The 2024 US presidential election is capturing attention worldwide as Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump face off in a closely contested race to the White House. With the US wielding the world's largest economy and military, this election's outcome will undoubtedly have far-reaching global implications. But what's at stake specifically for the Philippines and the broader Asia and the Indo-Pacific region with its timely global issue? I will be speaking to Josue Raphael Cortez, a diplomacy instructor at the De La Salle College of St. Benilde's School of Diplomacy and Governance. In this B-side episode, we will explore how the 2024 US election results might influence American foreign policy on critical issues such as trade and territorial disputes affecting the Philippines and the wider Asia and Indo-Pacific region. We will focus on key matters like the West Philippine Sea dispute, the China-Taiwan situation, and other related concerns. Good day, Mr. Cortez. I'm so excited to talk to you about these topics. Alright, so let's kick off this episode with our first question. In your view, how might a Harris or Trump victory impact the Philippines, Asia, and Indo-Pacific region overall, particularly in terms of military defense, territorial disputes, trade, and other key issues?
Concerning your question, a Harris or Trump victory will undoubtedly be impactful to the Philippines and to the rest of the Indo-Pacific today, given the circumstances that we are presently in. The Secretary of State of the United States, Blinken, even once said that we can't do anything about it, but we have to accept the fact that it is really within a region where the next global drama of sorts shall unfold, which in turn will, of course, involve the great powers of our time, the United States and China. We have to be pragmatic enough that the US is among our vital partners in instilling peace and stability, given that China, who is, of course, the primary challenger to US hegemony today, is also undertaking different strategies to further widen its sphere of influence, particularly in the realm of economic aid and partnership. So military defense-wise, the elections will actually have an impact on it, relating it with their own EDGA. Because the majority of Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, they actually believe that maintaining US presence and bolstering their alliance with the region and in Asia-Pacific as a whole is actually beneficial to both parties. In our case as allies, and of course, in the part of the United States. Why? Because it is one way for them to pursue their so-called manifest destiny, and it's also a way for them to further bolster that sense of hegemony within them. Because we have to bear in mind that when we talk about hegemony, military and economic presence are among the primary measurements or determinants for that. Moving forward in the case of territorial disputes, we have seen how the two candidates, Harris and Trump, have taken a stance against China and maintaining rules-based order and toiling to promote territorial integrity in light of the territorial dispute. So in the case of Harris, during her stint as the Vice President of Biden, she actually made visits in the region. She visited our country. She also visited some of our neighbors, including Singapore and Indonesia, in line with the East Asia Summit, wherein she delivered a speech and placed an emphasis on the need to maintain not just order within the West Philippine Sea, but also in light of the Taiwan crisis. So, on the other hand, in the case of Trump, during his time as president, sometime in 2016, he was very much vocal during his presidency. And this is even translated in his economic plans or platforms should he win these elections. This would include, of course, promulgating higher taxes for Chinese products, particularly on electric vehicles, which, as we may know, is now the primary competitor of EVs produced in the West. Well, we can say that there's some sense of duality in there, in such a way that in the past, he actually offered to be the mediator or the middleman in resolving the territorial disputes between China and India. However, in the case of our own territorial dispute with China, he actually rejected the claims of China over the South China Sea, which is a policy also that has been continued by his successor, Joe Biden. And then trade-wise, when we talk about trade, well, when we talk about election, whether it's happening in the US or even here in the Philippines, elections are really critical because they have the capacity that the election turn out, or the outcome of the election, can actually make or break shape or reshape the dynamics of global trading. So trade-wise, Asian investors are more comfortable with a victory for the Democrats rather than the Republicans. Why? Because elections, similar to what I said, are critical points that has the capacity to reshape global trade. And taking into account the fact, the looming tension between the US and China, then they are wary that a Republican victory can actually further catalyze the tension between the two great powers and in turn reshape global trade. Because in turn, they will actually be forced to actually adapt to the new policies that the new regime might actually implement vis-a-vis China.
You mentioned the issue in the West Philippine Sea. So, could you enlighten us more on how a Harris or Trump presidency would approach this issue?
They will both take a proactive approach in the matter because the disputed territories, we have to be pragmatic enough of our geography, is actually part and parcel of the so-called gateway to the region, which in turn paves the way for trade to both flourish and thrive. Which is why the American policy towards a region has always been geared and has been enshrined in the Indo-Pacific strategy that they are currently adhering to. Because that Indo-Pacific strategy is also a way for them to recognize the vitality of maintaining rules-based order and freedom of navigation. Because trade, at the end of the day, can also be considered as political in nature. In the case of Harris, should she win, it would certainly be some sort of a continuum with what Biden has started. After all, her vying for the presidency is something also that was unexpected, right? Because for the longest time, the Democrats have always rallied behind Biden. But things changed later on, right after their first debate with Trump. So given the experience that Harris has gained as to how the US stands on matters like this, for sure she will just continue and further expand this once she gains the chief executive post. On the other side of the pond, however, should Trump emerge as victor, this is where we can see a more nuanced approach from the United States. Statements alone, when Trump used to become the US president, are already indicative of this, relating it to our mutual defense treaty and to our enhanced defense cooperation agreement with the US. It was actually during his tenure as president that the term ironclad commitment, which shows the fidelity of the US and its security commitment to the Philippines, became popular. Although sometime in 2014, Obama also brushed off on the term of ironclad commitment. And given the worsening events in the past few months, Trump will not hesitate to do more counterbalancing acts or even further empower US presence across the region.
Given all the strategies you mentioned that Harris or Trump would take, who is now the best candidate for the Philippines' interest in the West Philippine Sea?
It would, given that the Filipinos in general, they tend to lean more on the democratic side of things, although at times we can also be brushed off in the more populist aspect of things or scheme of things. We can say that it is actually Harris's policy, if ever, that will work. Because in the past, if you can still remember, Trump made all these statements that he is more than willing to actually wage a tension with China, which is something that we are not prepared to be in. Because we have to accept that, we have to be pragmatic enough that one of their largest bases that is near China is actually situated in ours. So, should that happen, then, God knows what's going to happen here in the country. It's going to be a big war. And we cannot do anything but actually to take part in that tension.
Thank you very much for those insightful answers. So, I would like to ask this case scenario because there are a lot of instances before that the Philippines and China had a physical tension. So, if this happened again, what do you think a Harris or Trump will do in response to this kind of situation?
Well, Trump, if ever that he wins the presidency, what he will do, aside of course from delivering a statement, will surely undertake more counterbalancing acts. What do I mean by that? He will be asking more and more American troops to actually be deployed here to actually ensure rules-based order. However, on the part of Harris, if ever that she wins, aside from a statement, of course, what she will do is, of course, probably to adhere to what is written in our MDP And what is it? What is that? Actually, the DFA will already be doing it sooner or later should the war continue to get worse. What is it? To bring the issue to the attention of the UNGA. But at the same time, in the MDP, it's not the UNGA or the UN General Assembly that has been mentioned. Instead, it is actually the United Nations Security Council. But if you will think about it, it will also not be a viable strategy, if ever, given that one of the P5 or the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council is also China. So even if we bring it there, then China has all that veto power to actually, deter whatever the UN will try to undertake in order for us to maintain our territorial integrity and political independence.
So now I'm kind of curious about China's point of view in this election. So who do you think would be the better candidate for China's interests?
Taking it from the view not just of Xi Jinping but for the entirety of the Chinese Communist Party, the better candidate for them is of course Harris. Why? Because she is a Democrat. And during this time, although there are still hostilities, although the tension between the two countries are continuously brewing, but then again, how the US is actually making its stance or taking its approach vis-a-vis China is more moderate rather than Trump. Because right now, it is now a quest for hegemony or global dominance. And given that Trump, as you may know him, is actually fond of delivering all these statements and everything, making irrational decisions or erratic decisions, then the US will be alarmed should he win. So China will be alarmed should he win. Therefore, for them, it's going to be Kamala who's going to be the better candidate because it will serve their interests in the most effective way possible.
So now let's move on to the Taiwan and China dispute. So in your view, what stance could we expect from Harris or Trump administration regarding this issue?
The election outcome can actually reshape it also, for the lack of a better term. In line with what I said a while ago, the stance of Harris, should she emerge as victor, would continue to be the same way. Things will change, however, should Trump win. Because as early as now, the election turnout is already causing some sort of an internal panic on the part of Taiwan. So it is best for us to understand it through historicizing it. Trump once said when he was president that he will only adhere to the one China policy should Beijing undertake or offer a compromise to it. So scholars up to today are actually afraid that Taiwan might be that possible key for concessions. Because when he was president, Trump actually accused Taiwan for stealing the chip industry from the US. However, in a sudden turn of events, when he won the presidency in 2016, Trump actually made a phone call with the then Taiwanese president Tsai Ing-wen, which, for experts of diplomatic protocol, it's actually a break-off from diplomatic protocol because formal relations-wise, they do not have it. So for experts, you can actually view that phone call as an implicit way of legitimizing Taiwan, which of course also alarmed Beijing. Recently, Trump also made pronouncements that Taiwan should increase its military spending because the US can only do so much. Trump even said that we are the only one paying to maintain this alliance. Taiwan is not paying us back, rather. So with all these in mind, we can say that Trump's volatile nature, should he win, is what will make the people of Taiwan continuously wary. Because of course, yes, he may continue supporting the campaign for Taiwan's autonomy from China, but at the same time, who knows, maybe the level of security that Taiwan is feeling presently under the Democrat support will be reduced because he might offer a different strategy.
So with the approaches you provided about this issue, who's now better for the interests of Taiwan?
Given the facts that I've mentioned, obviously, they would prefer Harris to win. It is because now the US is really showing their support for Taiwanese autonomy. And as you may know, the bases that we have here in the Philippines, they're actually situated in our northernmost part. Because should something happen between Beijing and between China and Taiwan, then all those military installations would be activated in an instant. And of course, in acknowledgement of the fact that waging war can also be costly, and given the pronouncements of Trump that Taiwan should increase its military spending because we can only do so much for you guys, then it is something that they will also be alarmed of. Because at the end of the day, although Taiwan is prosperous, but then again, the economic toll that increased military spending would have on them will, of course, have negative repercussions on their end also.
Thank you very much. So let's move on to Philippines trade interests. US is the top destination for Philippine exports. How might a Harris or Trump presidency affect our trade relations?
Experts would actually say, even or some of our diplomats would say, that the victory of Trump would actually not have any big repercussion or ramification towards our trade. But we have to be pragmatic, because given, similar to what you said, that the US is actually one of our biggest trading partners, if not our major export trading partner. This addition in terms of tariffs, the tariffs that will be imposed, will surely have effects, negative effects in terms of our export, because we have to bear in mind also that both imports and exports, they actually has an effect also, a drastic effect also in terms of the local economy or their point of origin. Therefore, should Trump win and should he continue and actually promulgate these policies, planned policies on economic reforms, it's going to be bad for our economy in the long run. It will not be sustainable.
I also want to point this out. How about on the concern for remittances? As 41.2 of remittances of our OFWs come from the US in 2022. So how would the Harris or Trump presidency could affect this?
It will also have an effect, especially if we're talking here now about migration. Because when we talk about migration, as you may know, the Democrats are more leaning towards the liberal side. Therefore, for Harris, among her platforms would actually be the promulgation, the signing, the adoption of the border bill, which during the time of Trump, despite it being a bill that has been collaborated upon both by the Democrats and the Republicans, he actually rejected it. So now, if you will listen to the pronouncements of Trump concerning migration and in adherence to his America First policy, that should he win in one of his campaigns sometime in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, that he is planning to actually undertake the largest mass deportation in the history of the US. And it will be alarming, of course, from our end. But then again, if we ensure that the remittances that Filipinos abroad actually send are actually coming from Filipinos who are there, who are documented, then I don't think we have to fret so much about it. Given that the target, both of the bill that Kamala is planning to sign or adopt should she win the presidency, and what Trump is trying to address should he win the presidency, is more focused on those who are undocumented immigrants.
Thank you so much. So now we near the end of our discussion. So I would like to ask this most pressing question. So who do you think is most likely to win the election, and who would be more beneficial for the Philippines' interests?
Okay, so although I am siding with Harris on this one, there is actually a great possibility that Trump will emerge as victor in the election. This is despite the fact that if we talk about Filipino Americans there, they actually have a fair say in the election, which is why they are also doing grassroots campaigning for our end. Because in Nevada, for example, most of the Asian Americans there, they are actually of Filipino descent. Okay, so for me, Trump will actually has a better chance of winning it, because despite how inflation became so bad under his regime and the values that happened under his presidency, his popularity is something that can make him return to the Oval Office once again. Because although Kamala is gaining the sympathy of more and more minorities, that includes women, if Trump's propaganda and strategies combat all these, then he will surely make it. And concerning who will be better off for our country's interest, in relation to what I said, if you will ask me who will be better, it is of course Kamala. It's Harris. because a moderate and more liberal approach works better in the realms of trade, security, migration, and the like, contextualizing it in the Philippine setting. We have to perceive this election in a multifaceted manner because the US is not merely our security partner. Instead, it is also one of our primary export partners, major trading partners, and of course, a place where most of our migrants desire to go. And given the situation that we are presently facing vis-a-vis China, a total war, if ever, because of a certain pronouncement from the US chief executive, would totally be harmful for us in all aspects.
And down to our last question, why does this election matter for the Philippines or Filipinos? And which presidential candidate resonates most with Filipinos?
In relation to that, I actually saw a survey that has been conducted a few days ago. So a lot of Filipinos are actually saying that whoever wins the election. And that is, of course, because not everyone can really understand the impact or the partnership that we have with the United States. But then again, the candidate who resonates more with Filipinos today is actually Trump. Because if we will notice our history, we really have this trend of from a liberal president, we opted to shift to a more populist leader, a more populist chief executive. And given that Trump's strategies right now is basically working on the part of the Americans, what more in the case of the Philippines? You know, in the Philippines, whenever we have elections, we're so fond of all these gimmicks. And that's basically what Trump is trying to do also. He's trying to show through various instruments or various tools that he is really for the people. And that is something that is also relatable to us Filipinos. Which is why in our own local election, there is really some sort of sympathy at the end of the day. So for me, it's really Trump who is more appealing to us rather than Harris, despite the nuances in their policy.
In our conversation with Mr. Cortez, he pointed out that both Harris and Trump are likely to uphold the US presence in Asia and the Indo-Pacific region, focusing on a rules-based order and territorial integrity. Regarding the dispute over the West Philippine Sea, both parties are likely to take a proactive approach as it is a key maritime trade route and gateway to the region for the US. And during the times of physical tension between China and the Philippines, Mr. Cortez believes that Trump, aside from making statements, would engage in a counterbalancing act by deploying more American troops to ensure a rules-based order. On the other hand, Harris would adhere to what is written in the Philippines and US Mutual Defense Treaty and bring the issue to the attention of several organs of the United Nations. Regarding the China-Taiwan issue, Harris would likely continue Biden's policy and further expand it, while Trump's unpredictability could create uncertainty for the people of Taiwan. Mr. Cortez also believes that a Harris presidency would favor the Philippines due to her moderate and liberal approach that generally favors the country's interest. But he pointed out that it is likely that Trump could regain the White House once again due to his undeniable popularity, backed by his strong propaganda and campaign strategies, which might challenge Harris's support base among minorities, especially women. This has been another episode of B-Side. Again, this is Edg Eva. Subscribe now and enjoy industry insights on Philippine business and beyond.